Welcome to Blender add-on development for beginners. In the previous videos we learned about application handlers, user preferences and ways to send mail. Now we have to combine everything together and tie up some loose ends as well. In particular, we don't want our password to be shown as is, and in fact we don't want it to be part of the user preferences at all, because those end up in a file that may linger around in places that might not be easy to track, for example when you upgrade Blender. The solution to this is to store the password in a global variable that will not get stored anywhere and will completely disappear when you exit Blender. The actual password is then stored in a file and read from there, either when the user selects that file or when the add-on starts up. Access to this file can be controlled by the user and will typically only be readable by the user itself. An even better solution perhaps would be to use a password manager, but that is a bit out of scope of this series, and this gives a reasonable level of security. Okay, let's define a global password variable and some helper functions. Again, normally these functions would go into their own file for proper testing, but we keep things simple. The read password function gets the file name from the user preferences. We will add the password file property in a moment. And if the password was successfully read from the file, it indicates this by setting yet another Boolean property in the user preferences. The read first line function does exactly what it says. It returns the first line of a file, stripped of leading and trailing whitespace, or none if it fails. We also want the user to specify a file to read the password from, and for that we need another operator. This operator makes use of a mixin defined in the IOUtils module that we imported from BPY extras. This mixin will cause the operator to show Blender's file chooser dialog and report the chosen file name in the file path variable of the operator. So all that our code needs to do is store this information in the password file property and call the read password function to get the actual password. We could have made this a bit more sophisticated by dealing with the user clicking cancel, but that is left as an exercise you can explore yourself. The user preferences need to be a little bit different, so no password property, but a password file property instead. Also a Boolean property, password loaded, that we will prevent from being set by the user in a moment. It will be used to indicate if there is a password loaded at all. The draw method also looks a little different because the password row needs to change. We create a row inside the row so we can add the password loaded property and set the enabled attribute to false. That way it, and only it, will be shown as grayed out and cannot be changed by the user. And next to it we show a button with the read password operator. Note that we do not show the file name at all, because there is no need. The code can access the property and it will be saved alongside the rest of the user preferences, but showing it would only clutter the interface, so I decided to leave it out. But yeah, you may do as you like, of course. The rest of the add-on stays the same, so let's save it and reinstall it again. We now have a read password button, and if we fill in the other fields, we can see we don't have a password loaded. And when we click the read password button, it shows a file dialog. We can then locate our password file and click OK. Now we have a password loaded, as we can see, and if we click verify, we get OK. Much better, I think. So let's hook this all up to an event handler. The handlers themselves are not really special, but we do introduce a new one that will try and read a password if the new blend file is opened. Not strictly necessary, but added to show that you can act on non-render related events too. The status line variable will collect the status messages after each frame, so we can send them all together as part of the completion meshes. The render init handler clears that list and adds some intro text with information from the scene that will be rendered, like the name, the frame range and a timestamp. The render complete handler then composes a message based on those status messages and uses the send SMTP message function to send it. The render cancel handler does something similar, but indicates that the job was cancelled. And finally, the render stats handler the one simply appends the status message to the list. Now we could stop here because the add-on is essentially complete. You can download the final version from GitHub to use it as is, or to compare it with your own implementation. The version on GitHub has a lot of comments in the code to highlight all sort of things that may be helpful, but you will find that it also contains extra code related to presets. That is quite a bit more advanced and something we will cover in the last video. Feel free to skip that one, and thank you for staying with us so far, but if you are interested in a few special Blender quirks, then see you in the next one.